listening, and if you're not speaking, that's great, because otherwise we can have a little bit of background. That's a bit tricky with the recording. But it is a great pleasure today to welcome two speakers from the ABNA. I'm sure that's an organisation that many people will be aware of, the Australasian Biospecimen Network Association. So today we have two speakers, as I said, and I might introduce them in the order that they're going to be presenting. So firstly, we have Dr. Georget Reaiche-Miller, who many of you will know. Georget is joining us from Adelaide today, and she received her science and honours degree at the University of Adelaide, and then she subsequently completed her PhD in virology at the same university. So she was employed as a postdoctoral researcher, and in 2014, she then took the position as the full-time manager of the University of Adelaide Biobank. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the Biobank from previous ABNA conferences. It's well known for having needed to cope with some power outages and freezer disasters. And I think that's something that I've heard Georget talk about very compellingly at a previous ABNA conference. Is nothing like, I guess, a disaster to kind of change people's thoughts and, people's opinions about sort of collective biobanking. So our second speaker is, and I should say that Georget's currently the ABNA Vice President. And our second speaker is Cassandra Griffin, who's the ABNA President. And Cassandra received a Bachelor of Arts degree and then a Biomedical Sciences degree. And she's the Biobanking and Clinical Research Manager for the New South Wales Regional Biospecimen Services at the University of Newcastle. And many of you will be aware that Cassandra's currently doing her PhD, particularly her particular interests are the field of postmortem brain biobanking, and she's also interested in collaborative approaches to work with industry and group partners to explore support of clinical trials by biobanking. And yep, as I mentioned, in 2020, Cass was the ABNA Vice President, and she's the President this year. So it's a really great pleasure to hear from both of these speakers to talk about ABNA, history, highlights, and new horizons. So I'll welcome Georget to take to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for the opportunity. Hope that you can get some information out of us. And Cass and I were saying earlier that we want to make these as interactive and as relaxed as possible, because that's how ABNA rolls. So Cass, if you could please go to the next slide for me, that would be great. Okay, so I'll just highlight briefly how the presentation will roll. First of all, just the history of ABNA, who we are, where we came from, and what we actually do, as well as some of our achievements and milestones, followed by some current activities and our awesome plans and future goals. So who is ABNA? So ABNA, or ABNA, as some of us know it as, is the Australasian Biospecimen Network Association. We are a collaborative network of researchers from multiple different disciplines, all with the goal of supporting excellence in biobanking and biospecimen science. One thing that really excites me is that when I first joined ABNA, I thought it was Australia. We're not just Australia. We've got multiple biobanks from Australia, New Zealand, as well as the Pacific. So it's really empowering to see biobanking as a field and us be able to support not just us, but all those around us. So next slide. So ABNA has a management committee, which is made up of office bearers as well as ordinary members. And we have multiple subcommittees, some which we include is the Digital Media Subcommittee, a Disaster Recovery Subcommittee, which I'll discuss in the next few slides, a newsletter subcommittee known as BioBabble, which most of you would be familiar with, and we also have a publication subcommittee. We also have a conference organising committee, and without this committee, we will not be able to host awesome conferences like we've been doing the last few years. It includes members of the management committee, but also local ABNA members from the location where the conference will be held. And these members are our bread and butter. They really help us out when we all can't be in the same state to organise. One thing that we want to highlight is that all the work that we do is purely voluntary. We all have a full-time job that we work to during the day, and we dedicate our time to ABNA, purely voluntary. We do it for the love of biobanking, supporting biobank science, and we like to see it going forward. So on the next slide, we have the current management committee. So we've got, as Jenny just highlighted, so we've got Cass as the current president and myself as the vice president. We've got Leanne and Helen as our co-treasurers and Usha as our secretary, which most of you will receive emails from. And then we have our current list of ordinary members. I must highlight an awesome shout out to Wayne. There is a bit of a gender disparity here. And I would like to use this opportunity to say, hey guys, if you'd like to join us, we would really like to have other males in our team. Poor Wayne has to put up with all of our chats. It would be awesome to have some male representation as well. So next slide. Okay, so about our membership continues to grow each year, and there'll be a slide showing you something shortly, which is quite, it represents what we do. Our current membership stands at 169, but what we need to keep in mind is that out of those 59 of those are institutional memberships, and each one can include up to 6 individual members per institution. So we do have quite a large group of membership, which is growing. And we support organisations from different disciplines. So some of these include the autoimmune disease, cancer and clinical trials, diabetes and disorders of the endocrine system, pathogens and microbiology. And as we know, this is, with the whole COVID pandemic and virology, it's a hot topic, as well as neurological and other neurodegenerative diseases, ocular medicine, pediatric medicine, vaccine development, again, hot topic, as well as zoological samples. So ABNA is a professional body for biobanking. We have a few aims and visions, and we'll go through some of these with you. We first of all want to support Australian biobanking organisations to ensure that they have ethical collection of samples, as well as high quality of the biospecimens for research continuity and reproducibility. We'll also promote the benefits of biobanking in the Australasian community, including members of the general community, researchers, funding bodies and government. And we also enhance the knowledge, or what we're trying to do, we do, but we're also improving, is enhancing the knowledge about amongst the biobanking community. So we promote and we'll continue to promote information through our website, hosting our international annual scientific meetings, as well as national and international biobanks and partners. So a bit of history. And I must say that obviously, as you all know, this would have been way before we ever joined ABNA. So, and I know there's some of you in the audience that have better knowledge of this. So I do apologise if we get any of this wrong, but please feel free to jump in and correct us. But ABNA originated from the Australasian Biospecimen Network, which is ABN, which was established in 2002. And ABN was a result of an initiative in 2001 where various researchers involved in biobanking got together and put this network together. It held annual meetings like we do now, addressing key challenges, achievements and other goals in the field of biobanking. And in 2004, they were awarded an NHMRC enabling grant, which supported the subgroup of ABN Oncology, or ABN Onc, as most of us know it by, and also work on the tissue specimen locator. And we will talk more about this in the next few slides. It also created the role for ABN project manager. And it wasn't until 2009 when ABNA, as we know it, was incorporated as an association. The rules of the associations were adopted and the first committee elections were held. So on the next slide, we have an awesome picture courtesy of Dan of the very first 2009 ABNA AGM. And on the right-hand side, we have a small picture image of the ABN rules of association. So the origins and evolutions of ABNA, we will continue with 2010, where a second NHMRC enabling grant was awarded. And this supported the work on ABN Oncology Tissue Specimen Locator, and we will both be discussing a bit more on this as it's such a key feature and resource for all of us in biobanking. In 2004, ABNA signed the first ISBA affiliate organisation agreement, and most of you will know that ISBA is the International Society for Biobanking, So this is a massive step for ABNA. In 2016, we began the merger between ABN Oncology and the ABNA websites. And in 2017, ABNA was invited as an organisation by Standards Australia to be on the HEO 32 committee, which is the one that adopted the ISO 20387, which we're all been familiar with as the Australian standard. So what do we do? Quite a lot of things, but we will highlight the key aspects. And the first one is that we provide members with access to key resources. Some of these are educational resources, as well as standard operating procedures and guidelines. We provide relevant and up-to-date information, and we do these by different means, one of which is the newsletter, so the Biobank. Also, our new ABNA seminar series, which we've held 3 already this year, and the 4th one will be held during the conference, as well as some job advertisements. What we also do is initiate and nourish collaborations between biobanks across Australasia, and we do these by many different means. One, which is our annual conference, where we're able to mingle and interchange ideas and support each other. We also have advocacy and representation. So, we want our members to know that we're there to support them, that we all speak with one voice, and we have had ABNA represented in several different occasions as a body. So anybody that needs letters of support to do with biobanking or research, please know that you can reach out to ABNA and we'll be able to support you. We also have a member biobank register. So on our website, we have a list of all the biobanks within Australasia. We have multiple networking events, not just the conference. And again, I highlight the specimen locator, which will be an amazing tool. So next slide. Okay, so we move over on to our highlights. So there's been a few key ABNA and ABN Oncology achievements and milestones. There's a lot. We'll try to narrow down to the key ones. Obviously, our annual conferences, the ABN Oncology Tissue Specimen Locator, the Biobabble, which is ABNA's monthly newsletter, as well as our aim to broadening ABNA network to include biobanks and collections outside cancer banking. So next slide.
Sorry, it's just taking a bit of a delay. I'm trying to preempt you.
Beautiful. So this is one of my favourite slides, and it's showing the 19 years of annual conferences. So this year in Perth in October 2022 is our 19th conference, started in 2003 right through every year. 2020, courtesy of COVID, we didn't have one. But last year we were able to have a virtual event where we had quite a few registrants. So if you go to the next slide, Cass. Over here we can see every single one of our handbooks. It's quite a collection, and it's something that we're really proud of. It's just put there as an optical and graphical representation of what we do. And over here, we can see what I was mentioning earlier about our registrations and our members. So this isn't an awesome meme that Cass put together. So we've got ABNA. We have an upgoing trend in conference attendance. In 2018, we had 74 registrants. In 2019, we had 115, and COVID hit. Which is, holding us back, but we will overcome this, and we are in the process of doing so. And like I said, in 2021, we had a virtual event which actually had 104 registrants. So I'll move on to one of our features or milestones or achievements, which is the ABN Oncology Tissue Specimen Locator. So this is a web-based tool that was developed to enable high-level interrogation of samples available in the biobanks that we're participating. It had extensive mapping and categorization of data. Now, it doesn't matter how much I try to talk about this, it will never do it justice. The amount of work that was put in by the members to ensure that the mapping was done correctly and all the data that was put in is enormous, and we use this as a basis for our current locator. I just can't take my hat off enough to thank everybody that was involved during this time to do this. But as an example, one of the things they did is have client topography linked to the ABN cancer type. So, for example, from the 3 tissue banks across 4 Australian states, if the client had pericardium, for example, it would be pulled under a category of thymus and heart tissue. So it just had like an overarching, so people will be able to search without missing out on some samples they might be looking for. It utilised 3 different categories, which included primary cancer type, as well as broad morphology, and the sample type itself. On the next slide. As I said, they used extensive data dictionaries and mapping. On the right-hand side, these are the people that were involved in doing such a mammoth work. And again, we thank you. And apologies if I don't do this justice, but I can't begin to describe how useful this tool was. The pilot upload was tested and deployed in 2006. And it's actually the foundation for our current specimen locator, which Cass will discuss in more detail in her section. Next slide. Our next achievement was the Biobabble, or the newsletter. It started in 2017 and it was done with 2 editions per year. By April 2019, we got really excited and we started monthly editions, and we developed a subcommittee completely responsible for its contents and distribution. And I must say that this is one of my favourite parts of what we do for ABNA. We've got we normally reach out to members for have input. So what we will normally have is the newsletter published and sent out by email at the end of each month, and then it's able to be downloaded. It's available to the members now, and then it's able to be downloaded from our website 2 months after. If we go to the next slide, what our typical it's coming. What our typical newsletter would look like, we'll have ABNA updates, and at the bottom we have the August edition. So for example, here we talk about the countdown to Perth as our conference is coming. So we have ABNA updates, information about national and international conferences, which we have on the second to last slide on here, for example. Feature articles on any aspect of biobanking, so whether it's human, whether it's environmental, it's quite broad. And what we've recently introduced in 2022 is 5 minutes with a biobanker. And I must say that this has been a hit, with another one of my aspects of it. So next slide. So again, while it changes over, one of the things that we encourage and we do get a lot of is members' input. So we'll get someone saying, hey, I would really like to know more about this, or I've got a piece that I'd like to share with you guys. So that's what forms part of our newsletter. So if any of you guys out there want to share anything with us, please get in touch with us. Our next achievement was the ABNA website. So ABN Oncology and ABNA both shared common focus, which is to support and promote the best practice in biobanking. ABN Oncology project funding ceased, and as a result, we thought, why not? Why would we not combine the information from both websites into a new one to provide a more broad and rich resource, which is what the ABNA resource is. So we have a new combined home, which provides a platform for all members to use various different resources, which I mentioned earlier, as well as the tissue specimen locator. We launched it in mid last year, and it has a members area which has conference material, past, like I said before, past Biobabble editions, account details, and many more. As I was saying, one of the things that we do is that we reach out to our members for feedback. And during the COVID pandemic, there was ongoing conversations in our meetings on freezer failures and disaster recovery. What is it escapes me? Just general plans for ensuring that business continuity plans and all those things to ensure that if something was to happen, like COVID, for example, or any physical disaster, that we would be able to support our research by having a proper backup or plans in place. So what we've done is develop a subcommittee, which is our disaster recovery subcommittee, and what we're doing and have done is develop a whole lot of materials that support these biobankings in planning and preparation for any disasters. We've done this based on ISPA guidelines as well as ISO standards, as well as our own personal experience. So as Jennifer mentioned earlier on, a lot of the work that I do for my biobank was with our university legal and risk team, and it was all around disaster recovery and having plans in place. Other members have done similar. So putting all our experiences together along with the ISPA guidelines and ISO, we're putting a good piece of resource together around disaster recovery. We are actually at the conference, our fourth ABNA series, seminar series is actually on, it will focus on disaster recovery as an example. So those of you attending, we encourage you to come to this workshop. We have prepared it in a way that it's guidelines and suggestions. It's not a policy. So it's not going to suit everybody the same, but we will have the guidelines, checklist and everything that you can accommodate or set up for your individual needs. So I think we think it's a really good tool. And we have an ongoing commitment from our disaster recovery subcommittee to ensure that this is the case, and we always welcome members' input, and hopefully during the workshop we'll have some ideas put through. So I think that's it for me. Cass, we hand over to you now.
Sorry, there seems to be a bit of a delay driving things on this end, but thank you for that awesome introduction. So from looking at where we've been and what we've achieved so far, now we'd like to transition a little bit into some of the things that you've seen from ABNA in the recent months and some of the ideas that we're floating for things that are coming up in the next couple of months and then ultimately out to the next couple of years as we try to keep ABNA relevant and keep ABNA meeting the demands and the needs of our community. So, wow, that is a really annoying delay. Come on. Okay, so this slide in here is here for twofold. One, because yes, we acknowledge that as an organisation, we need to ensure that we continue evolving and that we remain relevant for our organisation, but also as a nod to our previous president who laid the foundations for quite a few of the initiatives and ideas that we're about to go through now. So just a shout out to Anusha, who lay a lot of the groundwork for a lot of the exciting things that are coming through in ABNA. So in order for us to really think strategically about where ABNA needs to go in the future and what ABNA needs to do to remain relevant, we went back to basics and we looked at our community and we looked at what we needed to be capturing and the needs that we needed to be addressing. So going back to our understanding of our community, we do know that biobanks vary hugely across our field in terms of specimen types, storage types, and their sizes. We know the value and we know that they're key to research, but not just in medical research, which I think historically for ABNA, that has been one of the primary focuses, particularly in oncology, due to the ABN OncLink, but really trying to capture and consider the fact that as we move towards a One Health approach and we start to unite various fields of research, we need to be looking at biobanks contributing to, yes, medicine, but also conservation science, agriculture, veterinary medicine, and environmental management. As a result of that, over the last couple of years, and you will have started to see this a little bit more in our 2021 conference program, ABNA is actively working to engage biobanks and biospecimen collections in the area of human and clinical medicine, but also veterinary, zoological, environmental, and agricultural. And what we're trying to do is foster a feeling of inclusivity and celebrate commonality by highlighting the definition of biobanking and trying to promote the idea of biospecimen science so that we are not just a static biorepository. I think quite a few of us would have heard Dan Catchpole talk about biohoarders. We're trying to move away from that definition into an active, process-driven service that can store and distribute samples with the purpose of current and future research and celebrate that that is something that unites all biobanks across different fields. For any of the art aficionados in the room, you may be aware of Andy Goldsworthy's work. He's one of my all-time favourite artists, and he's a natural installation artist who works purely with what he sees in any given location and doesn't introduce anything external and synthetic. These works are done purely using autumn leaves and leaves that were found in those locations. And I think they provide a really nice metaphor for what we're trying to do with ABNA, in that we're looking at celebrating commonality, but also bringing to the fore some of the variations and some of the learnings that we can find from our aligned biobanking colleagues who we may think of as being in a different field, but actually share a huge amount of overlap in terms of practice and process that we can learn from. We're trying to invest in biobanking as a profession, looking at people with skills and infrastructure as, I think sometimes people outside of our field, and I realize we're preaching to the choir here, but a lot of the time people look at biobankers as people who manage freezers and they don't recognize the speciality of the discipline. And ABNA is really committed to promoting and fostering biobankers and biospecimen science as a discipline, which we hope will pave the way for further investment in biobankers, not just biobanks, but biobankers as infrastructure. And that's through this idea of biospecimen science. We'd like to really overcome the silos and help to engage biobankers and biospecimen scientists across different fields to lead us towards the One Health approach that I mentioned earlier, and look at interdisciplinary learning and the sharing of skills. And I'll have a look at our conference program a little bit later, but hopefully for anyone who has had a sneak peek, you'll see that we are getting a lot broader. Come on now. Okay, so ISO 20387 is something that I think we are all aware of, and that we are all aware is going to be coming across our desks and that will need substantial consideration in the coming years. Conversations around accreditation, certification, best practice have been at the fore of ABNA for a number of years now. And we've had updates on the development of the standard at our last couple of conferences. Some of you might remember last year, Simon Lake's in excess fueled tour through the standard that I think had everybody captivated and giggling. The feedback from our members post that opportunity was that they'd really like to hear more about how they can practically work with the standard and explore the standard, not necessarily go for accreditation straight up, but just to understand in what capacity it could be broken down or used, or what sort of piecemeal approaches they could take towards following the standard in their day-to-day lives. We were aware that ISBA were doing quite a number of things in this space, and obviously there's been some amazing seminars and workshops and talks coming through ISBA to this effect. So our goal was to definitely not duplicate the effort, but to take a step back, look at what was relevant to an Australasian audience and community, and then try and put together a program that would complement the work that was already being done by ISBA. That led to the first of the ABNA seminar series, and the feedback that we've had so far has been really, really positive. So thank you to everybody who's sent emails and passed along comments. It's really important to us that what we do is beneficial to our members, and we certainly don't want to be barking up the wrong tree. So if we're doing things that aren't appropriate or aren't useful, it's just as important that we know. Our inaugural series took place across 4 seminars. The 4th one, as Georget mentioned, will be held as part of our annual conference program in Perth on the 19th of October. The first session was looking at why you would work towards accreditation. And the idea there was to look at some biobankers who have been through the process, so the Cornell Veterinary Bank, to see what it actually did for their service in their biobank on the whole in terms of social sustainability, financial sustainability, and just in terms of fostering those ideas of best practice and how that refined and improved their workflow. And also from Claire, who was intrinsically involved in the development of the standard through her role with ISBA and the Standards Committee. We then moved on to experiences of the accreditation process, where we heard from the guys at Monash, explaining what it was like being the first Australian biobank to go through that process and break down the standards systematically, because let's face it, it is a massive, massive job. And for a lot of us, I'm not ashamed to say it's quite intimidating looking at how we break it down and attack it. So I think hearing their personal experiences of how they approach the accreditation process was really invaluable for a lot of our members. And then just last week, we had certification and accreditation and a comparative look at the 2 processes and how both have huge benefits for biobanks and can be used interchangeably, or one might be suited better to certain setups in certain organisations. And that was with Jenny, who thankfully joined us for that. So thank you very much, Jenny. And also with Gillian from NATA, who joined us to present at that event. Our 4th seminar, which will be held as part of the program, we put it out to our members and asked what people would like to see or how they'd like us to round out this conversation. And what we've landed on, based on that feedback and based on some thoughts and capabilities from inside the committee, is to look at a practical application of the standard. So just taking one element of that out in terms of risk and contingency planning, and looking at how we can look at existing biobanking processes across groups and how we would then use the standard to look at meeting some of those requirements and putting some documents in place. We're looking at it to be a really dynamic and really interactive session. It's being chaired by Samantha Higgins, who has a special interest in this area. And based on what we've seen so far, it looks like it's going to be a really exciting session with a huge amount of support from the Disaster Recovery Committee and Helen Simpkins, who's also presented and been part of this process and has a huge amount of insight to contribute. As for what happens next year, there is a gigantic question mark and we don't know. We're hoping that following seminar 4, we might have a little bit of an idea based on some of the feedback from members in the room. But as Georgette's already suggested, we are really open and extremely grateful for feedback and input from our membership. So after this session today, or if anybody would like to shoot through any ideas or suggestions, we would really love to receive them, because at the moment we have a blank slate and the world is our oyster. So let us know what you'd like to hear and we will do our best to deliver a comprehensive program. The Biobanking Research Network. So as Jenny mentioned at the start, I am, for my sins, undertaking a PhD at the moment. And in speaking with a couple of the ABNA committee members who have also been through the process, we were discussing the fact that it can be quite a lonely process going through that, particularly when you're working in a field that doesn't have a huge HDR representation. That then segued into wider conversations around trying to demonstrate the value of biobanking with bigwigs and with funders and in other forums and conversations. And working closely with scientists and being scientists ourselves, we all know that data talks. But it's really hard to have that conversation when a lot of the time there isn't the data to substantiate the value of biobanking. And there hasn't been a great deal of biobanking research currently undertaken. So ABNA has a commitment to nurturing and mentoring biobanking professionals, particularly those who are ECRs or higher degree research students, or those who are moving into setting up newer biobanks. And we really feel that a part of that is nurturing and trying to help propagate a culture of biobanking research within that community. If we were trying to define biobanking research, how long is a piece of string? But some of the things that we've come to in our initial discussions are things like value studies, so cost-benefit analysis, output analysis. A lot of us are used to doing this anyway in our annual reporting for a lot of our parent institutions. Studies in sustainability and cost recovery models, protocol or best practice investigations, qualitative work on donor or stakeholder engagements, and this seems to be a bit of an emerging field at the moment, particularly around models of consent. And I think a lot of that was likely forced by COVID, but hasn't necessarily been a bad thing in terms of some of the conversations that it's instigated. How we can best use and implement our samples, but as I say, how long is a piece of string? There's a lot that can really fall into that. We've done some exploratory work to see what's out there in terms of biobanking research, and interestingly, there's actually a slightly stronger presence in non-human biobanking, particularly in conservation science. In a lot of reproductive and conservation programs, breeding programs and things like that, there's actually a hugely strong biobanking contingent, and they're doing a lot of qualitative work around protocol refinement and that type of stuff. So it is out there. And we put out a call to ABNA members in March of 2022 and formed a working group. And from that working group, some of the ideas that we've thrown out are for ABNA ambassadors. So we know there are biobankers out there who perhaps don't realise that they are biobankers or that what they're doing is biobanking. And we feel that one of the only ways we're going to identify this is to start and increase our presence at non-biobanking events. So knowing that we can have people at gastrointestinal conferences or environmental conferences or general cancer conferences who can keep their feelers out and have those networking conversations and try and open the door for incidental or unaware biobankers to come into the fold and to benefit from the community that ABNA provides is one of our initial goals. We'd also like to start holding some student seminars and presentations at the conference, and there is a session dedicated to that in this year's program so that we can foster and create a space for biobankers to present their research outside of some of the normal avenues. And we're looking at some of the online higher degree research training seminars. And I know internationally there's a much greater presence of this. AXT sponsored an event, was it this year? Earlier this year, where one of the sessions was looking largely at training programs in biobanking. So knowing that there are initiatives like that out there internationally, it would be great if we could link up with some of those. So that's some of the things that we're exploring. And I know that Jenny's also doing some work with the Statewide Biobank, and we've had some of those conversations as well. And we'd like to increase our publication opportunities. And I'm cautious to say anything just yet because nothing is set in stone, but we are trying to look into some avenues around having some abstracts and potentially some fully fledged manuscripts published from our 2023 conference publications in collaboration with ISBA. It is still very much a fledgling idea and not something that we have nailed down, but it's something we'd really like to work with just to increase the value of students and researchers attending biobanking conferences. The ABNA specimen locator. So Georgette's already provided an introduction to the ABN tissue specimen locator, which, as she said, was a mammoth amount of work and lay the foundations for us to then go forward and develop the second iteration. We've actively renamed it purely to move away from the idea of tissue per se and to kind of continue that momentum towards inclusivity of sample collections. It's fully customizable and expandable because we appreciate that biobanking is going to continue to develop and continue to grow, and that to lock in discrete fields is going to create headaches for us down the road. But that's also quite a difficult thing to negotiate, how wide you go versus how specific that you go without losing too much detail. It is supporting as many fields of biobanking as we can loop in, and we are open to expanding if there's anybody else on the horizon we haven't contacted yet. And we're also hoping that it can support biobank sustainability in that it's not just a specimen locator, it also directs users to biobanking services as well, be they histological services or processing services, all sorts of things. So it's all about increasing the optics of our industry and making it more accessible. We're hoping that it will be inclusive and foster networking between different biobanks, particularly multidisciplinary biobanks. It will be dynamic and regularly updated, and it has a CSV export functionality. So establishing the minimum data set was no easy feat. And as Georgette's already spoken about, with the ABN oncology, it was about a mapping process and ensuring that variations in mapping across institutions could then be linked to key terms to try and consolidate and minimize the search process. Trying to do that outside of a purely cancer context is a huge hurdle. So admittedly, we've possibly lost some of the detail that ABN oncology were able to achieve with the original tissue specimen locator. But our goal is that by providing that top line view, we can then direct users back to the individual banks who will then have that level of granularity within their collections. As I say, it will be updated quarterly to ensure that relevance and availability is maintained if new collections have been added or if other collections have been sent out. So to give you a little bit of an idea of what to expect, this is the template with a couple of examples within that will be sent out to member biobanks and those who are willing to come on board. The green categories are our mandatories. So I'll step through on the next slide and show you some of the options in terms of drop downs. But category is effectively disease research, sample type, pretty self-explanatory, and the storage. These orange categories here are purely to try and retain some of the functionality from the additional ABN Onc specimen locator, providing additional detail for cancer and recognising the heterogeneity that we need within that population of samples. And then we have additional fields here that are a mix of free text for things like associated services and, again, details if people want to add additional. It becomes really difficult to try and create a homogeneous kind of data dictionary around samples. So we've tried to add free text as much as possible so that we don't have users and researchers going to incorrect biobanks and being slightly misled. These are some of the drop downs that are available across the various fields. So again, we've tried to be as inclusive and broad reaching as we can, but we acknowledge that there will be categories that we've missed and there will be sample types that we've missed. Fortunately, it's been constructed in a way that we're able to expand this and build onto this as needed and as user need dictates. So once we have all of these filled in by individual banks, and I stress that they are top line, because I can imagine a lot of people are looking at this going, how do I fit thousands of samples into this, which is why samples are pooled to try and minimize the labor associated with that. Once they're in and they're uploaded, this is the user interface that anybody who logs into the specimen locator will encounter. And again, they're drop-down boxes for the 3 mandatory fields. If someone is to select cancer in that primary field, it comes up with 3 conditional categories as well. They're not mandatory, so you can search purely for cancer primary breast or primary colon, and you don't need to put in any further detail to then be able to generate a CSV. And then you can use that CSV to then search based on greater detail and higher granularity. The pilot phase of the update is complete, and that involved data sets being submitted by each of the management committee, which allowed us to clean the data, to look at where we might have some problems or challenges in terms of refining it or consolidating it. And we were able to feed back to the company that were developing the platform to incorporate a lot of those learnings. We're still undergoing testing and refinement. There are a couple of little bugs that still remain in some of the download functionality, but we're hoping to have those worked out so that, touch wood, we can have this launched prior to our conference towards the end of September. Phase 2 will involve a call out to all of ABNA's members, where we will ask them to submit a spreadsheet detailing their collections if they're willing to be involved. We'll then combine and clean all of that data and upload it. And from there, we'll likely, at this stage, it looks as though send out quarterly requests to banks. Is there anything you'd like to add to your data? Is there anything that you need to update? And we can refine that process on a quarterly basis to make sure that the data remains relevant. ABNA won't have custodianship of any of these samples, and ABNA won't be dealing in any of the transactions around these samples. We're purely a networking tool that will put users in touch with biobanks. So individual biobanks will remain custodians of their samples and will have full control over all of this. It's just about networking and helping to foster those connections. So our conference for this year, and I'm keeping an eye on the time, ABNA's theme for 2022 is Blue Sky Horizons. And this is about acknowledging the difficulties that we've had over the last couple of years, but also focusing on opportunities and pathways to innovation. It's an integrated program, and our goal this year was to try and revisit the themes and the relevant questions that we've continued to ask at our conferences over the years, but to look at them through a different frame and a different context. So at any biobanking conference, we would expect to see conversations around consent, around cost recovery, sample viability. But rather than looking at them through the traditional frames, perhaps we could look at consent for native animal collections from Indigenous custodians. Perhaps we could look at stakeholders in forensics or in paediatrics. So the same conversations and the same learnings, but with different perspectives to try and broaden the conversations. In terms of our program snapshots, I won't go through in too much detail given I am conscious of time. But just to call out our wonderful keynote speaker, Dominic Malone, who will be speaking about COVID vaccine biobanking. We have a number of debates built into this year's session, one around industry collaboration and another one around models of consent. And we also have an elevator pitch session that we'll be introducing this year during our poster session. It's a bit of fun. Everybody, we hope, will have had a drink or two or enjoyed some canapes. And then much in the same way you might have seen a 3-minute thesis delivered, we're asking a select number of our submitters to present their posters in 2 minutes. What's the sell? What's the bottom line? Why should be interested? So that the next day we can go and have a greater look at some of the posters. And for anybody who's staying around after the conference, just a shout out that Rottnest Island is a short boat ride away if anybody would like to go and visit any of these cute little guys afterwards. It's being held at the Rendezvous in Scarborough, which, as you can see, is an absolutely hideous location with terrible, terrible amenities and facilities around. And I think we're actually going to struggle to keep people off the beach, given some of the rooms actually open directly onto the beach and provide a gorgeous view during the conference. And our dinner will be held at La Capanina, which has equally horrific views and a terrible menu. It looks like it's going to be a really, really special event, and we hope that everybody will take advantage of the networking opportunity that that affords. In terms of the future of ABNA, so our 2023 conference, the details of this is still being nailed down, and we don't have signed conferences as of yet, so I'm cautious to announce the venue, but there is a hint there for anybody who's playing at home and would like to make a guess. In celebration of our 20th year, we will be looking at biobanking on record and looking at some of the achievements and the emerging trends, and basically looking back at where ABNA's come from and where we're going into the future, and trying to really celebrate the community that's being created. As I mentioned, our seminar series will be running again in 2023. Our primary goal is to ensure we're continuing to provide members with well-rounded educational opportunities, and we are very open to all suggestions and contributions to the program. The last thing to mention, it's been flagged by a number of people that as ABNA grows and expands its reach across various networks, that we could potentially be at risk of losing some of those consolidated networking opportunities for cancer bankers to speak to other cancer bankers, for paediatric bankers to speak to other paediatric bankers. So something that we're toying around with at the moment is the idea of special interest groups that allow people to attend a broad and all-encompassing conference, but still have dedicated opportunities to network with those whose roles and professions directly overlap with their own. We're workshopping ideas at the moment, and again, this will go out to our membership to make sure that everyone has a say and has a voice. But some of the ideas are special interest groups around quality management or cryo storage. Cancer is a very obvious one. Conservation science, collecting biospecimens in the field, autoimmune and rare diseases, pediatrics, just to ensure that we provide overarching and also consolidated opportunities for networking. Delivering on ABNA's mission and keeping this organisation moving takes an absolute army, and Georget and I are absolutely blessed to have an amazing management committee who get in and get things done, are full of ideas. No ask is ever too big. So they are all absolutely wonderful. We also have our local conference organising committee, who Georget mentioned as well, who are our feet on the ground and get things done, and we could not do it without them. We'd also like to mention a number of past committee members, and I won't name them all because you know who you are. They receive texts about bank accounts and constant requests for historical knowledge. They never stop giving, they never stop contributing, and that kind of organisational history is invaluable to us. Our ABN and ABN Onc partners, our ISBA colleagues, and thank you also to Jenny and everyone at the Statewide Biobank for inviting us here today. And I guess we will open the floor here now for questions.
Indeed, we will. Thanks so much, Cass and Georgia. That was really a fantastic talk. I can see Dan's very quick off the mark, so I will call on him. Dan, please jump in.
First of all, as one of the originals, I'll call myself that. Thank you so much for your presentation, ladies. It was absolutely wonderful. It warms the depth of my heart to know that ABNA, something that was a brainchild over a cup of coffee with a couple of colleagues, has now come so far. So go for it. We really appreciate it. And good luck with all the efforts that you're doing. Two questions. And I know we're all very, very proud of ABNA, how it's maintained its impact in the biobanking and the biomedical research world. So go for it. Two things, one sort of comment and then two sort of questions, I think. One is that wearing my ISBA hat, just to let people know that next year, the 2024 ISBA annual meeting is slated to be in Australia. As you know, we've been talking to ABNA and other local societies in the region to actually combine together to sort of help support that meeting. So hopefully 2024 we'll see ABNA and ISBA get together. I also wanted to highlight that ISBA and internationally, ABNA is well known around the world and are well respected for the work you do. So keep going. You're being noticed by lots of people, not just within your own circles. The two questions are, first of all, dealing with your membership, the comment about we're all volunteers, we all work really hard, we all have day jobs, all that's fine. Do you think ABNA is at the stage where it needs to mature to the point where it gets its own association management committee and steps up with regards to its own level, sort of a more professional level of organisation, paid level of organisation, becoming a more professionally driven society? Not that you're not professional, but you know what I mean, sort of actually driven as a more of an organisation rather than a society, if I can put it that way. And the second question I have is, biobanking communities, we're all very good. We know and we love the biobanking. We all pat each other on the back and we all get together and support each other. But are we going to try to work towards more of an outward viewing sort of point of view, where we start to talk to those people who are not actively involved in biobanking, but actually influence what we do and how we do it? For instance, the leaders of our hospitals and universities and research institutions, our policy makers, those people who establish the frameworks in which we do research, where we can actually start trying to influence those fields outside of our sphere, which actually then will hopefully make our job much easier as biobankers. So I'll leave it with those two questions. Thank you.
I'm happy to jump in with first stab, but Georget, please jump in. Thank you. That's for your wonderful feedback. It's really lovely to hear that people are aware of ABNA outside of our traditional circles. I mean, we know that to an extent, but it's always nice to hear it. In terms of growth, I think ABNA will possibly come to a point where if it continues to grow at the current rate, and we hope that it does, we might need to look at additional support just to ensure we can keep operating at the same level of professionalism. What that looks like, where that support comes from, how feasible that is to obtain, I think that's something where we just need to keep our eyes open for opportunities. And certainly we can start to agitate for things like that. Should it look like opportunities are going to present, we're open to it. And there will come a time where we possibly do need to do that. But I also think one of the things that makes ABNA special is that it is one of, I mean, it certainly isn't a small organisation, but it is run on a lot of heart, and it's run on a lot of, you know, collegiate, collaborative relationships. And I actually think that's one of the things that makes it special. So if we were to expand it out into a more corporate, I guess, formally run organisation, we would have to be careful and ensure that we maintain that heart and we maintain that sort of user-driven focus. In answer to your second question, yes, absolutely. So the ABNA ambassadors are part of that in terms of trying to get people to talk about biobanking and talk about ABNA outside of biobanking circles, because constantly preaching to the converted doesn't get us very far. So yes, but as we said, data talks. So we need to foster that culture of research and come up with some, you know, some published runs on the board so that when we are having those conversations, we're not just going in there with goodwill and a great attitude. We're going in there with something behind us to actually put paper and put results in front of people so that they sit up and take notice. And I think it is happening. We were speaking about this prior to the NADA presentation, prior to the accreditation seminar last week, that it is an exciting time to be a biobanker. We are being spoken about in other circles, and awareness and appreciation, it feels like it's coming. It's overdue, but it feels like it's coming. So I think we are headed in the right direction there.
I agree, Cass. You narrowed it down perfectly.
Thank you both. We've got a couple of questions. We've got a few in the chat actually. I might just read them out for speed. So we've got a question from Michael Eppes about is ABNA able to support members in accreditation efforts towards the QBRS application and exam process?
When you say support, I'm not sure. ABNA is not in a position to provide financial support, but in terms of training opportunities and trying to help network with people who can provide technical support, absolutely. But any sort of practical support in that sense we can, but we're not in a position. I'm just not sure entirely. If you could maybe clarify the support specifically, we can maybe address that a little bit more, but if we can, we will.
Yeah, Michael, I can also if you send me an email, I might be able to put you in touch with people as well, because I think you've indicated you started the process, but you might have run into a few roadblocks and we might be able to help.
Yep.
So Albert's asked about, the focus on biospecimens, but also has raised a really good point about data biobanks, which is likely to be, more common in the future because obviously storing data is cheaper than storing samples. Does ABNA have any thoughts on kind of curating information about data biobanks?
We actually have 2 sessions in this year's program looking to that. So 2 that are looking at AI and innovation and working towards data banks. And we had one last year as well within our program about a mega data bank. So yeah, absolutely. And I think the idea of what is considered a biospecimen, whether that is a physical biospecimen or whether it's biological data obtained from a specimen, I think that is a definition that's going to be evolving and changing over time. But, the specimen locator as it stands now does enable for things like that to be added, and perhaps we can make it clearer. But yeah, absolutely. I think that is definitely something that ABNA will have to consider. I mean, Georget, would you like to add anything to that?
No, it's exactly right. So even with our local institution, data banking is one of the things that we're looking at quite deeply. And like Cass said, we have a couple of sessions, one which is a workshop around data banks and data management within the conference. So ABNA is definitely moving on with the times, and I'm sure that as we evolve, ABNA will support the the evolution, I suppose.
We've got a few more minutes. Does anyone else have any questions? Would anyone like to just put up their hand? jump off mute. Is there one?
Beth, I think possibly. Sorry, I'm trying to navigate into the chat.
Where is that? Beth, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead. Ah, yes, you've got a hand up, Beth. Beth, you might be on mute. Look, while we're waiting, I was going to ask a question about social media and biobanking. What do you reckon? Twitter or LinkedIn or something else?
Is this because our accounts are slightly neglected?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Look, I have to confess, I personally was looking after one of our accounts for a little while and I was horrific at remembering to get on and tweet. So apologies to our entire management committee on my behalf for that. We certainly have members who are much better.
Twitter.
We are working on a terms of reference for how our committee manage social media. Just conscious that as an organisation, we need to be careful how we manage that. Yeah, it's hard. I think Twitter has sort of been the dominant platform. And outside of Twitter and LinkedIn, I'm not sure of sort of anywhere else that it's likely to go to. Georgette, I have to say it's not something I've spent a lot of time looking into. Maybe that's a massive oversight on my part.
No, even with other sort of, research side of things, it's mainly Twitter and LinkedIn. So I don't know, maybe I'm old fashioned, but I would probably just stick with those two. And like Cass said, we try to post as much as we can in Twitter. We do have a LinkedIn account, but yeah, we really are working with the terms of reference to ensure that all of us within the subcommittee are compliant and not saying anything we shouldn't be saying, especially because we're representing an organisation.
But I do think it's growing in prevalence on social media, which is certainly not a bad thing.
Absolutely.
In terms of visibility
Yeah.
and optics.
I mean, I oversee their Biobank's Twitter account, and that's a lot of fun. I try and retweet a lot of stuff about biobanking and particularly biobanking events.
Yes.
But I don't think there's a huge amount of biobanking activity on Twitter, but there is a lot of researchers on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's a good way of reaching into the researcher kind of space, like the research user space. I don't know though. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Does anyone else have another question? Anyone else have questions? Because I think people know I've always got them. Probably the only question I have about the specimen locators, and one of the things I always think about these tools, is we put a lot of effort into the tools. How much do we monitor how much they're being used, and are they delivering the outputs that we need? Is there any information about the use of the specimen locator up until now? And do you have plans in terms of monitoring use and, whether it does actually lead to researchers forming connections with biobanks?
In terms of the previous specimen locator, I'm not aware of any data or any metrics. Lisa Devereaux is probably the right person, or Dan may have some ideas around that. Moving forward, yes, it's absolutely something we'll be able to measure in terms of at least even hits to get user hits to the actual specimen locator. But I think that's something we would like to put out to the member banks that contribute, is let us know how it goes. Like, keep the conversation open, because if we have that open communication, then yeah, it'd be nice to actually jot that down as a metric and show that whether it's useful, if it's not, why not, how can we better use the infrastructure? Because as you say, there's no use having it there if it's not getting use.
Yeah.
Look, I think we're at time, but that was. Oh, sorry.
Can I quickly add
Dan,
something to that? Just an encouragement to ABNA to get in touch with the BBMRI. I can put them in touch with some people there who've got a tissue specimen locator. But they have a couple of other tools. One called the Negotiator, which is worth looking at, which is basically matching up the user's requirements and the samples that are available in the different banks, and it's a very neat system. As with all of these things, though, it requires a lot of maintenance and a lot of ongoing upkeep. And when you're dealing with IT, there's all the upgrades and upkeep of servers and background platforms and so on that people use. So it is a tall order. And the other group that you might want to talk to is iSpecimen, which is more of a commercial company, but they've got some very interesting models. So maybe considering dovetailing onto some of those groups and working with them may give you some solutions as well to your problems.
Thank you, Dan.
To running these things.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's the other point I wanted to make, which jumped to my mind, was you mentioned the term biohoarding, which comes from a paper that I wrote, but the context of
Copyrighted it.
I copyright, that's fine. You can use it. I don't mind. That's great. The content of that paper, though, is that the solution to biohoarding is actually not found in any of these sorts of technologies and accesses and even social media accounts. It's actually through considering the policymakers and the policies that we work in, and if you get them on board, does that help drive what we do? So that'd be an interesting experiment to do as well. So sorry, you're getting me on a high horse. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Dan.
Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Look, I think it remains to thank our speakers for really a wonderful 2 presentations, and it's very inspiring, I think, to see the energy in ABNA, the great directions that you're planning, a wonderful conference up ahead in Perth, and lots of exciting things to look forward to next year. So, yeah, thanks very much for coming along and telling us all about it. And it's wonderful to see so many people online. I think that's a testimony to the interest in ABNA and biobanking. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank
See you
Jenny.
soon.
Thank you for having
Bye.
us.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.